It's getting closer, isn't it? We got, like I said yesterday, we got the Young Stars Classics happening in their various forms across North America. Training camp discussions are happening. It's all very exciting. And so the previews continue today, looking at some teams that maybe aren't being taken seriously enough across the National Hockey League. Let's start with the undervalued teams. No particular order to this, but at number one, it's Carolina. I did not expect Carolina to be on this list. Quite frankly, I thought they would be on the other one. But they finished with 108 points last year, I think. They might have had more than that, actually. But they finished well north of 100 anyway. And their point total from Vegas is 100.5. The East has gotten a little bit better. I do think, like, there are a lot of teams on the come up in the East right now. And Carolina did lose quite a bit of talent. They kind of recovered okay. Right? Like, they pick up Walker. They make a couple other additions. I don't think this team lost as much as we thought they did. And so I do think that there is a little bit of sticker shock in seeing, oh my God, those guys left? Okay, well, that's a problem. And I think there's a little bit of fatigue with people based on a lack of playoff success for this team. But I still think that makes this a value at 100 points. And so I think Carolina probably gets it. I still think this is one of the best teams in the league. I worry about the goaltending. And so to make a long-term investment on a Carolina is a bit of a scare. But I have faith that they're and I also think they have the best coach in the league. At 2, it's Dallas. They lose Pavelski, but it's another year of development for the kids. It's another year of development with Jake Ottinger. They did have a lot go right last year. And I guess like the counterpoint to it's another year of development for the kids, it's another year on the tires for Ben and Sagan and those gigantic contracts that they have. They do lose Tanev, which was a really, really smart move, picking him up last year. He's on his way now to Toronto, but I still think this is a really good hockey team that has a ton of offensive firepower. They have, I think, one of the best defensemen and one of the more underrated players in the league in Miro Heiskanen on their blue line. I still think this is one of the most talented teams in the NHL. And again, 103.5 points is a lot. They're going to have another very good year, but that is a step back from where they were a season ago. And I think they can improve upon things out in Dallas. At 3, and honestly, this one, if we were ranking them in terms of who I thought was the most undervalued, it might be this team. It's Montreal at 76.5. I think they're just quite a bit better. That they go out, they acquire Patrick Laine. And I understand there are some concerns about Laine, and he hasn't been Patrick Laine in capital letters in a real long time. But if I'm right about Montreal getting breakout performances from Slavkovsky and Caulfield, Nick Suzuki is going to be solid. Gallagher's going to be him for as long as he is healthy. I don't think that you're going to have, like, I think Doc is going to be able to step up as well. I don't think Laine is going to be called upon to do as much for this team offensively. Well, I guess that's the only way he's going to be called. No one's asking him to do a whole lot defensively. But I do think that he's not going to be going to have to go out there and carry a lot of the load for this group offensively. I think he is going to be a very well paid, but I think best case scenario for Montreal is he is kind of a complimentary type of a guy and a bit more of a finisher while you have some of the young kids kind of flying around. But I have great faith that you have some pretty good development in some of these kids and they take a step forward. I think that there are going to be some steps taken on this blue line this year. You do have some concerns about what's happening in goal. I think they do kind of have to figure out what they have in a couple of these guys. And also, there have been some things tactically with Marty St. Louis while this team has been building up that make me concerned about really buying into Montreal this year. All that is fine when you're doing the rebuilding thing, but now when you're trying to take that step out of the rebuild category and into the competing for a playoff spot category, that is when you kind of need those coaching decisions to be ironed out a little bit. And so Marty St. Louis, I think, has to have his best season as a coach, and a lot of guys need to have their best year, but I think that this is a team that can finish over 500, and so I like taking them as an undervalued team at 76.5. Seattle is next at 87.5. And what is one of the lessons that we learned from the accountability episode that we did? The worry about the long-term contracts can absolutely be a long-term worry. But for one season, that kind of goes out the window. Do not overvalue your concern about the value of a contract when you are looking at that player for a year. And so, yes, signing Stevenson and Montour to those contracts, specifically Stevenson, signing those guys to those contracts feels rather inhibitive inhibitive long term. That being said, also makes this a better hockey team this year. Stevenson, I think, is the exact type of a player that this group kind of needed, and they still have a very good blue line, I think, and adding Montour to that really does help. There's going to need to be a little bit more scoring on this team, but I think Beniers taking a step forward and maybe getting a little bit more out of a Shane Wright. I think that there's potential for this Seattle team to be a playoff team this year. And at number 5, it's Winnipeg. The last impression we got wasn't good, but this is still, I think, a good roster. Connor Hellebuck is still one of the best goalies in the world. Defensively, Morrissey, one of the best defensemen in the world. You still have Scheifele. You still have Connor. You still have, for now, Ehlers. You still have a lot of offensive talent. I think they have some very good depth when they made that trade with the LA Kings for PLD in being able to get guys like Iafallo, to add to guys like Nemesnikov and Lowry and Appleton and all of that. I think this is a very well-built team that is going to give other teams some problems once again in the Central Division. And so 95.5 points, love it. I will take that. I do feel a little bit worried that a few of my undervalued teams, actually all of my undervalued teams, with the exception of one, still have pretty high point totals. So that could come back to bite me a little bit. But overall, those are the teams that I think are wildly underrated or undervalued going into this year. In terms of players, again, going off the NHL.com fantasy rankings, just quickly, at 5, it's Steven Stamkos, 53rd overall. He had 40 goals in 2 of the last 3 years. To get a 40-goal guy in, what would that be, like 4th, 5th round, seems kind of awesome. And so I think there is, I think, a real undervaluing of Steven Stamkos going on right now. We talked about it yesterday in people overvaluing the Tampa Bay Lightning. Going from Stamkos to Gensel is a step down. And for Stamkos, yes, going from having Kucherov and Point around to Marchessault is a bit of a step down. That being said, Stamkos is still good. People, I think, are treating him like he's this old vet who's just going in to just be the leadership hire for the Nashville Predators. That is not the case. This is a guy who can fill up stat sheets. And so I think he's being undervalued right now. His teammate, Gus Nyquist, comes in at 4 at 126th overall. 23 goals last year with Forsberg. And A, Philip Forsberg is an amazing distributor of the puck. B, I think now, with Stamkos, with Marchessault as a second line, and then whoever you want to put with them, that is going to get a little bit more of the attention that Forsberg and Nyquist got last year. And so you're probably going to get the top defensive matchups on those guys. And so there is one in the column for Stamkos, but also I do think that it's not going to be the sole defensive focus, because that was it last year for Nashville. It was Forsberg, it was Nyquist, and that was it offensively, and then whatever you're getting from the blue line. But now, with a bit more of a rounded out lineup, you can't just focus on one team this year, and so I think Nyquist might be able to benefit from that. Also, Nyquist is 100% on my I can't quit you guys. I will always be a Gus Nyquist fan. At 3, it's Mika Zibanejad, 65th overall. Point totals the last 3 years, 72, 91, 81. He fills up a stat sheet. This is still a very good New York Rangers team, and so I think people are kind of overlooking him a little bit. At 2, Adrian Kempe, 44th overall. 28 goals last year, ended up a stretch of back-to-back 35-goal seasons. Also, I know fantasy isn't just goals and assists. He had 75 penalty minutes last year for an LA Kings team that likes to kind of go crash, bang, boom, and so he can do that as well. And so I think there's a little bit of value with him at 44th overall. And coming in at number 1, it's Connor Bedard, 50th overall. We saw last year with limited teammates and in a bit of a limited sample size that he is the truth. And yes, he's probably not getting 100 penalty minutes for you this year, blah, 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 blah. But I think this is going to be a gigantic step forward for him. I think he has better line mates than he had last season, and I think that is going to rocket him into some gigantic numbers this year for the Chicago Blackhawks. So those are my undervalued players in the NHL this year.